Welcome to today's Energy Central webcast entitled Integrating Environmental and Social Justice into Asset Investment Decisions. Now, I'd like to hand the floor over to David Wu to kick things off. David, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, PJ. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. First off, I'd like to start off with introductions. So my name is David Wu. I'm a client experience practice lead with Copperleaf, and I will be moderating the webinar today. We're joined by two fantastic speakers from Southern California Gas, Maya and Ning, who will be presenting SoCalGas asset management framework and how enterprise asset management team is exploring ways to support efforts to consider and integrate ESG dimensions into asset investment decisions. I'll now hand it off to Maya and Ning for some brief introductions. Over to you, Maya.
First of all, thank you for having me here, and thanks, David, for kicking it off. Just a quick introduction. So my name is Maya Menon. I am the Asset and Data Strategy Manager at SoCalGas, California. And my organization's leading the Enterprise Asset Management Initiative, which is a very exciting world to be in right now. There's just so much new technology and capabilities available for utilities that's allowing us to better kind of advance our decision-making process on our assets. And SoCalGas has really been leaning into those opportunities these past couple of years. So we're super excited to share some of that with you today. Under Enterprise Asset Management, we have a key pillar called Asset Investment Planning and Management, led by Ning Chou. So I'm going to hand it over to her for a quick intro and overview of her program as well.
Hi. Yes, just like Maya said, we enjoy the opportunity to be here, and yes, and I am leading the asset investment planning sort of arm under Maya, and we work closely with Copperleaf, David and his team, and among other system integrators to kind of try to implement and on this roadmap to build our asset management program. So thank you.
So Maya, I'm going to pass it over to you now to give a brief introduction of SoCalGas and the EAM strategy at SoCalGas.
Of course. All right, next slide. So a bit of overview on SoCalGas before we get started, right? So we are the nation's largest natural gas distribution utility with a mission statement to deliver increasingly clean, safe, and reliable energy to over 21 million consumers. And we do this by through 6 million plus meters in more than 500 communities across Southern California. Our service territory is around 20,000 square miles, and it spans from central to Southern California, from Visalia down to the Mexican border. We service our consumers through about 100,000 miles of distribution main and service lines and about 3,400 miles of transmission pipelines. And that delivers over about 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas on an annual basis. And that actually accounts for about 5% of the US gas delivery, which makes it all the more important to really build a reliable asset management plan that actually provides us with those tools and capabilities to really make sure we're enhancing the quality and the performance of our assets, right, today and in the future. So with that said, this is a pretty good segue to kind of get into the overview of enterprise asset management and how we're building that organization in SoCalGas. So next slide, and I can kind of go into that overview of EAM. All right, so what is enterprise asset management at SoCalGas, right? So oftentimes enterprise asset management is sometimes a challenge to kind of wrap our minds around because it can be a pretty broad topic in general and a pretty broad practice, right? And a lot can kind of fit into this umbrella of EAM or enterprise asset management. But if you really want to focus in on defining EAM for SoCalGas and utilities, a lot of California utilities, a good place to start is the Asset Management ISO 55000 standard. And in that standard, it defines these 3 main pillars of EAM: data foundation, asset investment planning, and data governance, right? So we'll get to those 3 pillars of EAM. But if you kind of take a look at our vision statement up at top, right? Our vision statement is managing the health of our assets using clean, reliable, risk-based data so we can create a more strategic asset lifecycle plan that ultimately achieve our enterprise goals. And as you can see on the right side with those operational goals that we have, right? SoCalGas and our other California utilities, we have operational goals. We have improving risk and safety, clean energy initiatives, innovation like digitizing our data. We have regulatory compliance requirements that we have to meet, and we have maintaining system integrity. So how do we know that we are creating strategic investment plans on our assets that give us that clear line of sight into meeting these operational goals? And so in an effort to really enable that vision, these are the three main programs that we've built under EAM. So this first pillar is data foundation, that one in the blue right there at the top. What really drives success in enterprise asset management is focusing and cultivating the data on our assets. That's one of the foundational biggest pieces of EAM. We need to be able to identify, consolidate, and really bring clean, reliable operational data, ideally in a digitized form, into a single platform where we can start doing better analytics and more efficient reporting on our decisions on our assets. And that's where data foundation really comes in. Currently, I'm sure a lot of you experience the same things. Data can be structured, it can be unstructured. Some is very easily accessible, some may not be. So it takes a lot of manpower, manual effort, and time to really kind of take that data and use it in the right way to start making those kind of trusted decisions. So that's really where data foundation comes in. The next pillar is asset investment planning. So asset investment planning, the idea here is that it's leveraging a common decision-making framework, and we call it the value framework. And it uses risk and asset data to give us quantified, measurable outcomes tied to a multi-year capital plan on our assets. And this capability is enabled by Copperleaf. It essentially takes in asset data, financial data, operational data, and it calculates risk reduction and benefit to all our capital investments on our assets. And with this information, what you can do is we can better justify our investment decisions across multiple years, so we can start proactively planning our capital investments into the future. So that's really where asset investment planning and optimization comes in. And then the last pillar is data governance. Data governance is essentially making sure we have the data practices, the rules, and the processes set to make sure the data is of good quality and up to standard, so we get better trusted decisions around our data. And so those are the three main pillars of EAM. One thing I do want to add, EAM directly supports our ability to kind of make strategic decisions that align to our company's objectives, but it also gives us the stronger justification and the confidence to defend and support the decisions that we make as a California regulated company, right? And so as we have more and more rigorous requirements coming from the commission, this gives us that confidence and that justification to be able to give that right information when we make those investment decisions. And so that actually gets me to my next slide, which is around our changing regulatory climate in California. All right, so just kind of getting into this next slide, right? What is changing in our regulatory environment, and why are we doing this? Why are we in this journey, and what are we trying to align with in the next couple of years? So the main takeaway of this slide, really, and you'll kind of see it as I talk through this, is that as we see more and more rigorous requirements coming from the CPUC around decision making, we need to have systems and processes and data available to start supporting those decisions. And so some of the new requirements I laid out on the left side here, it essentially proposes, the CPUC essentially is proposing that we need a common risk-based decision-making framework, right? We need to start monetizing our risk reduction and measuring how effective our risk mitigation is by doing a cost-benefit analysis on our investments. So that's one thing, right? That's one thing that we're starting to see and trying to uncover some opportunities around. The next requirement, or the next kind of opportunity, is we're looking into exploring bringing in environmental and social justice attributes like disproportionately burdened communities into our decision-making process and into that consistent value framework that I talked about before. And we're starting to understand, how do we better understand equity between a DBC or a non-DBC, or disproportionately burdened community versus a non? And how do we start making decisions around that? And then the next one is doing a cost-benefit analysis, right? And understanding our portfolio's health. That's another thing. Are we making smart decisions on our portfolio of projects that provide us the highest benefit for the dollar spent? And then the next one is being accountable for calculating how much risk we have actually reduced by investing and performing on our risk mitigation activities. That's another thing that's coming down the line. And so these are multiple regulatory asks that we're going to have to start kind of addressing and aligning with. And it opens up a lot of opportunities to really start leveraging technology and data to start helping us on this journey. And so one huge opportunity that it gives us is that it starts to break down silos, right? We start to better build departmental integration and creating this kind of unified way of making decisions. And so that's one huge takeaway of this as we start going on this journey. And we start kind of bringing in different aspects of risk, right? We start seeing safety, reliability, financial, environmental impacts, social justice impacts, and all that start coming into our decision-making process, which in turn really starts breaking down those silos as well, as everyone starts getting into that kind of decision-making process as well. So that is kind of this overview of EAM and kind of what's changing on the regulatory front and how we're starting to support that vision. This is a good segue to our next slide, which is kind of getting into how we are operationalizing this. How do we actually make this real with the capabilities and tools that we have in EAM? So I'm handing it over to Ning.
Thanks, Maya and David. Okay, so just kind of continuing, and then I think Maya touched upon a lot of these aspects, but just getting into maybe a little bit more details. So when we think about, how do we operationalize? She mentioned this data aspect, right? So in order to leverage a tool like Copperleaf, we need to have strong data that's usable and accessible. So when we think about our source asset data, we have, the asset attributes, just what assets are we talking about and what attributes are associated with them. And then we have this risk data. And then of course, the geospatial data that's associated with our asset. And then unfortunately, Maya touched upon this, a lot of times these are siloed. When we have, regulatory mandates, sometimes we need to first interpret, like what does this mandate even mean for, right? Determine the action items. And then the next step is to figure out what data that may be required to support that. And there are, we exist in silos, just like I'm sure many of you may resonate with this, right? So sometimes there may be data requirements that came down to a department that they don't even know if the data exists. And this data may well exist, right, in another department, but it's unknown, right? So or uncertain. So we started to use the analogy of the iceberg for our asset data, like our asset risk and GIS data, right? So there's stuff that's above, sea level that people know exists, and it's maybe being accessed. And then there are things that are just underwater that we know it may or may not exist, but it's like a big unknown, right? And then of course, Maya also mentioned that there's the, adding on the challenge of the structured and unstructured. So there are structured data, our system are like over 100 years old, right? So there are data that is absolutely handwritten, there are forms, we still have them, but how do we reap data from that? So then we can feed it to, some of these, more modern tools such as Copperleaf. So in our data foundation program, what we do is we source and standardize. And of course, there's, coming up with ranking and prioritization framework to see, where do we go first? Because this is very time consuming, right? This is time consuming work to source, to identify what is the right data to even start to standardize and bring into this lake. And then of course we have to align it to our asset, right? What are the asset currently called right now? How do we identify them today? How was it identified before? And can we align them, right? And then sometimes this data just comes out in the field, and in the more modern data, it might be a GPS location that we can align, and snap to our asset. But in the old days, it might just be, right here I'm at the, intersection, or like a marker that's above ground. But then how do you link that then to your what's actually below underground, right? And then we do all this work, and then we consolidate them into our sort of data lake, this governed data lake. And then we applied this governance, which we are in the process of implementing a tool called Calibra. So it's a data catalog, data governance, and data quality tool that kind of, outlines, the people process around the data, like who owns it, who maintains it, who can provide answers if we have questions about this data, and provide access, right? We're talking about, we're trying to, getting to faster turnaround in terms of accessing data and using data, right? And all this good data, we're trying to feed into this value. And then in the next slide, I'm kind of gonna get into a little bit about what this Copperleaf program is, right? So we feed this problem, and then ultimately to arrive, and empower our decision makers around data to feel confident in the decisions that they are about to make, right? So at the bottom, we kind of talk about high level of where, like, together we would like to go. We want to have, automation. We want to have, clean, reliable data for analytics. And then we want to be able to have these life cycle based capital and maintenance interventions that, again, the data feeding this decision analytics tool, which Copperleaf is, that kind of empowers decision makers to feel confident that they're making the right decisions. And then not just based on like a single decision, right? How do we standardize and create policies and plans and principles, right? That kind of guides and provide the guardrails for future decisions as well, right? And then of course we're trying to move to more quantified, risk and measurable outcomes, right? There are a lot of SMEs that in our company, and their input is absolutely critical. But is there any way to capture this kind of SME input into more quantifiable or consistent manner, an objective manner, so that where it's not, maybe things could be there's nuances from SME to SME, but can we get all that into the system? And then of course, ultimately, again, it's for the, providing the right data to empower the decision makers. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so speaking of this Copperleaf program, so we like to think of it as sort of the three sort of core foundation to this implementation, or to this future vision. And the first thing is, as we mentioned, we want to build this common risk and value framework, right? We have a mandate from our state regulators to have this risk-based decision-making framework. And this is sort of the operationalization of that, right? And so right on the right, we have the sort of our strategic values, right? Safety, reliability, sustainability, compliance, and financial, right? And then under there, I have just some examples. This is not all that we're measuring or all that we can measure, but we need to kind of drive towards what are the KPIs that's important to the company within each of the strategic values. And the idea being, we are moving towards quantification, right? So we can compare apples with oranges at some point, because we, normalized, calibrated in a way that we can put them side by side and understand the impact they have against these objectives with objective measurements. And then of course the second sort of big leg to the stool is our investment planning. So having this framework, now can we make proactive decisions of when to intervene, when to do certain things, and still meet, safety, reliability, sustainability, compliance, and financial objectives. So, and then at the bottom, I kind of show there's different levels of our organizations. They all need to do investment planning, right? We start with the business units. There's certain drivers, they have to do certain work, and then they have different landscape for what they're looking at, right? Of course, accounting and finance will play a role. Maybe they set allocations. Maybe they have some ways of looking at our planning different than our business units, right? And then of course our executives have certain vision that they want to drive. Our company is about, we want to be innovative, we want to be forward thinking, we want to drive the future. We're not just sitting here waiting for regulations to just come down and then comply. We want to be part of that future. So we want to consider this long-term, like multi-year, like into the future kind of a thinking. And then lastly, of course, going back to this decision making, right? Having this transparency and this quantified data. And how can we build consistent objective values and measurements so that we can all trust the insights and then the decision making that we're doing. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. I think that's it. Turning back to you, right, David?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ning, and also Maya for presenting the overview and the approach. It's really clear that all these three pillars need to work together and continuously work together in order to get us the right outputs to give to the decision makers at these organizations, including SoCalGas. And what I want to talk a little bit about in my section here is the approach that Copperleaf and SoCalGas took on a particular type of assets. So this is just an example of a model within the Copperleaf Value Model Library. This is a main replacement model for medium pressure gas distribution mains. And so I had a pleasure of working very closely with Maya and Ning over the past almost 2 years now to, again, understand what data is currently available, what data could be available in the future in order to feed a model like this so that we can start to standardize how risk mitigation and asset intervention value is calculated and automated for all capital projects that are being undertaken to replace assets in the field. So some of the model inputs we are taking in, very standard, what the likelihood is of different failure modes for the asset, and what are the consequences associated with these different failure modes. So whether you have a hazardous leak versus a non-hazardous leak, what are the consequences driving those risk events or stemming from those risk events is what we are putting into the model. So out of the model, we get some very key strategic items that Ning and Maya had touched on that focuses directly on SoCalGas' strategic objectives. So looking at how much safety risk is this main replacement project or program mitigating, how much reliability risks as well as mitigating, any cost savings, any emission reductions, any customer interruption reductions are all things that we are looking to and capture and calculate dynamically and automatically at scale across the entire gas distribution network. So with these results and outputs, we're able to then kind of think about what's coming up in the future in the regulatory space. So as Maya mentioned, there's a lot of change happening in the California regulatory landscape and also in many other jurisdictions across North America as well. And one of the opportunities that we saw early on the project is staying aligned with what the regulatory policy and direction is, so that when we're implementing Copperleaf and other tools that we have an idea of how do we ensure that what we build is useful both today, but also can be easily evolved to take into account new requirements, more rigorous requirements that are coming down in the future. So for those that aren't aware of the CPUC ESJ action items and also the ESJ pilot study that has all the IOUs in California have been directed to look at, just wanted to touch on 2 action items that really spot out to us as we were again, looking at asset management, looking at capital investment plans for SoCalGas, and trying to fold these action items into the decision-making process. So this is really a little bit of a call to action, where definitely we are still very in the early days of exploring how to incorporate these action items into future planning processes. So how do you consider the equity of your plan and how certain risks may be disproportionately impacting some communities more than others? And then also to estimate to what extent is the proposed investment plan going to be benefiting, impacting the disproportionately burdened communities, and how does that relate to the non-disproportionately burdened communities? So this is all new requirements that we haven't looked at before, and we're still exploring how to understand and estimate and consider these impacts that based on the CPUC's guidelines. So really, exciting, and again, as Maya said, just a lot of opportunities to understand how to bring in the right tools, the right processes to support these studies and requirements in the future. So now, folks might be pretty familiar with the Cal EnviroScreen tool, but for those that aren't, this is just a screenshot pulled out of GIS, and it's a public screening tool that is published by the California government that helps both public and private organizations identify how certain California communities may be disproportionately burdened by pollution and other maybe climate-related vectors or socioeconomic vectors as well. So this screening tool provides a lot of census data, provides a lot of air pollution, poverty data, and we're looking at how do we take this geospatial data and marry it with the cost-benefit analysis coming out of Copperleaf in order to start to explore and dig into those action items that I had from the CPUC in the previous slide. And now I'm going to pass it back to Maya to talk about how integrating these two key data sets and through kind of the data foundation process, through the asset investment planning process is happening at SoCalGas. So over to you, Maya.
Yeah, thanks, David, for the background. So we did a preliminary analysis using this Cal EnviroScreen and our multi-year or our investment plan coming out of Copperleaf. And so we have our entire distribution network of investments in Copperleaf. So there's a lot of data in Copperleaf that we're using to be able to start making some analytics and start making some kind of insights around, where are we making our investments and what can we do about them in the future. So like David mentioned, we took the Cal EnviroScreen. So the Cal EnviroScreen it uses environmental, health, and socioeconomic information to kind of produce scores for every census tract in the state. So what we did was we overlaid this Cal EnviroScreen on GIS, and that was kind of our first step. And then that gave us the opportunity to see where are, first of all, the disproportionately burdened communities and where is it not, right? So we were able to kind of see it on our GIS. And then the next step that we did was that we brought in our medium pressure pipeline segments into GIS. This allowed us to see and kind of identify the length of these main segments within these different communities. So we were able to see like, okay, we have, these medium pressure pipelines in this community versus not. So that was kind of the next step that we took. We then analyzed the current 2023 main replacement capital plan. That was an output from Copperleaf, right, which went through kind of this cost-benefit analysis. And we started getting some insights into the investments planned on these medium pressure pipeline assets within these different communities. So then we were able to see, all right, what kind of investments are we making in a DBC versus a non-DBC? Then the next step we took was we started identifying how much mileage is being actually replaced within these communities. What is the safety risk mitigation that we're seeing? And what is the emissions reductions that we're seeing across these different areas? And this was all, you know, we were leveraging a lot of the outputs and calculations that we also got from Copperleaf as well. So we were able to do this because, first of all, multiple investments were in Copperleaf. So we were able to automate a lot of this process through the tool itself. And then two, we were able to start seeing data around risk mitigation and emissions through the metrics that we calculated within Copperleaf as well. So we kind of merged what we're already doing in Copperleaf and kind of overlaying that layer onto GIS to start seeing some of those insights. So kind of moving to the next table there, saying, what are some of the upcoming opportunities, right? So what we can do is we can start establishing some kind of baseline, right? And saying, and assessing equity, right? We can say, you know, what does our plan look like today? And what do some of our future capital plans look like? And is there equity between those? And what should we do about this? What are some of the implications? What kind of decisions can we start making? Another thing that we can start seeing is kind of baseline risk, right? What is the public safety risk mitigation that we're seeing in our capital plans in these communities and versus non? And what are some of the fugitive emissions that we're calculating versus a DBC versus a non-DBC? So we can start seeing these insights and then starting to see how do we use that in decision making? How do we start using that in our investment planning? And so there's a lot of things that, you know, a lot of analysis that's been kind of going on in the background. And we're in this, you know, kind of preliminary stage where now we have really the opportunity and the chance as a California utility to start kind of shaping that decision and really kind of paving the way into that kind of process. So really exciting. This kind of starts, this is definitely kind of the first step and is getting us a little bit closer into understanding how did environmental and social justice really start kind of integrating into our decision-making process, which is, you know, one of the biggest things that are that the commission is starting to kind of explore as well. So that's kind of our initial preliminary study on the ESJ. All right, so kind of closing it out, you know, enterprise asset management, what are our values? What is kind of our future vision with everything that we talked about today, right? So one, we want to continue utilizing Copperleaf for this multi-year capital planning. And we want to be able to prioritize our work based on asset data and asset lifecycle. And we want to be able to do this using kind of a clearly defined value framework, right? A consistent way of making decisions using our asset data. That gets me to my next point, which is reliable and accessible data. We want decision makers to be empowered with reliable and accessible data so they can make trusted decisions and they can start prioritizing their work with more confidence. So that's another thing. And then gets me to my next point, which is this common value framework, right? That actually kind of ties to my first point around breaking down silos, right? Risk will be quantified consistently with more transparency across portfolios and at all levels. And so I think that's the kind of the main idea behind having this common value framework and this common decision-making framework. And then the last thing is aligning Copperleaf to support California state regulatory requirements and this environmental and social justice pilot study. So we want to be able to marry what we're doing in enterprise asset management and these new requirements that are coming down the line on the regulatory front and be able to align both those programs and both those initiatives, because there are really two things that we're doing here, right? We're trying to make sure that we have the data and the confidence and the justification for the decisions we make today, but moreover, that we are confident as we start planning for the future as well. So those are kind of our main 4 values of asset management and kind of where we're heading in the next couple of years. Thank you. Any questions? Feel free to ask, add it to the chat.
Thank you so much, Maya. And with now, we'll open the floor for any questions from the attendees.
I see one question here. So the question is, does DBC, disproportionately communities assessment, happen outside the Copperleaf tool? Yes, the assessment of DBCs and where those communities lie is outside of the tool, outside of the Copperleaf tool. It is actually looking at the Cal Virus screen and brings that in. What we do is that we marry the output of Copperleaf and we bring that into GIS, and the Cal Virus screen is overlaid on GIS. So we're marrying both those data sets into GIS, if that makes sense. But the assessment of DBCs is outside of Copperleaf. And I think there was another question around.
Thank you, Maya.
Sorry, I missed one more question around that. Have you evaluated options for equity, what equity could look like when incorporating DBC data? Not yet, but that is definitely something that we are kind of putting our minds together, not just within SoCalGas, but across all the California utilities to see what does that look like? What does the equity look like? And what do we need to do about it if there is no equity? So those are key topics of discussions that are coming up.
Thanks, Maya. I've got one that I'll ask, see on the screen now. How do we ensure that the quality of data we ingest into Copperleaf is of good quality? Maybe Ning or Maya, either of you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can start, and then Maya, you can feel free to add. So, so this is, we are just beginning to see incoming data, and then in our first try, we have these quantified data for the for our main replacement segments that as David has shown, but we do on some of our other asset types, not fully quantifiable data is available at this time. So there's some, data validation we have to do. We have to, build consistency and objectivity into the model as we speak, but then also just looking for just standard outliers, right? And then, with Copperleaf in this, my understanding, and then David, feel free to add on to, like with this upcoming upgrade that we will be shortly doing, there's going to be some kind of a data quality and quality assurance type check, looking for outliers and also building into machine learning. Like if you have similar types of projects, would you expect the risk to be the same, right? Would you, and if they're not, why, right? So those things will be highlighted. So sometimes it's valid that they're different, right? And then so those things can be highlighted so discussions can happen among the right stakeholders. So those are some of the things we're checking, and then also building into standardization, right? So what makes sense? What is that consistency? So and then at the same time, I mentioned before, like building these guardrails. So what consistency is and decision making is under the right framework.
Thank you, Ning. So let me see if I got. I think there's two questions that are kind of related. So I can take that one. So the first question is the risk assessment done within Copperleaf or added into the program from a different source? So the risk assessment for the model that we were looking at was done outside of Copperleaf and was then inputted into the Copperleaf model as an input. But there's some models and risk assessments for other types of work outside of main replacement that could be done and is being done in Copperleaf through different models to assess risk. And in terms of, and then the other question was, how was impacts monetized to dollars for monetized risk? So it really is, that's a good question. I think for the jurisdiction you're in, you may have different guidelines on how to do that. But I don't know, Maya, if you want to talk about how the CPUC has looked at that previously and what it's looking at today, but it's really around the FMAP proceedings and using equivalent consequence values for what a meter outage is or what a injury or a serious injury or serious incident is, and kind of using that as a way to as a consequence side of the risk equation to try to monetize what's the risk of certain events and their various likelihoods.
Yeah, I think you covered it, David.
Okay.
I think also, there's a human life factor now. It's a DOT value, and that's being that's also in the commission documents as well. So that's also another way that we're looking into kind of monetizing risk. That's also being incorporated into that framework as well. I see a question around, is this program accepted well by the impacted organizations in-house? And I'm guessing that's within SoCalGas. I'm guessing that's what the question's asking. There's a lot of, there's a lot of change management that goes along with implementing enterprise asset management and the Copperleaf program. I think I mentioned this before. When you start creating a consistent way of decision making, it really needs to start with integrating that process and that mindset shift into, the business process itself, right? The decision making process itself. So there is a lot of change adoption that goes on. A lot of stakeholders that are involved in-house that, are in that journey. It's challenging, but yes, I mean, it's part of the process as we go through this next couple of years. I don't know if that answered, if that was the intent of that question, but it's a process.
Okay. Let's see another question around explaining if Copperleaf has the ability to show asset management plan in a geographical representation in Copperleaf, or does Copperleaf provide a GIS layer as an extract to overlay other data, such as what Maya was showing earlier? So the answer to that question is we can do both. It depends on the version of Copperleaf. The latest versions of Copperleaf has some GIS, native GIS representation that it can integrate with an existing GIS system that you may have. So that's a more new and modern approach. But we also have the more traditional approach, which is what we had taken in this initial study, which is extracting the data out of Copperleaf. And then using the data foundation and the data lakes that Ning and the data foundation team had set up previously, we're able to then look at those data together in a common kind of data lake. So that's how that was being done, but definitely different ways to approach that.
I see another question here. Thanks, David, for that. Do you have any plans to validate data through stakeholders and community feedback? That's a great question, actually. So yes, there's multiple sessions of data validation with our stakeholder teams. That's part of the implementation process. It's months of calibrating the data that we get from Copperleaf and looking at, does it make sense? What are the values telling us? What is the benefit cost? What is the health of the portfolio? Is the data accurate? So there is a lot of back and forth and a lot of stakeholder engagement and collaboration that goes on. A very interesting one that is community feedback. I mean, we have sessions with other California utilities who are also using Copperleaf. There are sessions where we share ideas. What are they seeing on their side? What are some lessons learned? And we kind of share that feedback as well as we go through this process. There's a lot of other utilities that are also kind of in similar journeys, different maturity levels, but that's kind of the beauty of it.
Another question around what Copperleaf product suite was used for this work. So for this work, we used Copperleaf Asset in order to have the asset, medium pressure pipe assets in the system. We used Copperleaf Portfolio, which is where all the investments were created and analyzed for optimization and with constraints. And then we use our reporting data store, RDS, in order to get the data out of Copperleaf to share to the data lake. Hope that answers the question.
I see another one, and maybe Ning, if you can take this one. For asset types you haven't quantified yet, do you have some type of process outside of Copperleaf to align decision making? Example, things like fleet, facilities, etc.
Yeah, so I think in general, and it's probably not anything different for most company, is that the process includes bringing the internal communities, the SMEs together. So it's based on SME input. There's a ranking system that we have. So outside of this sort of quantified framework that before we implemented Copperleaf, we always had some kind of a ranking system where SME input would rate the different investments, and then and then even with Copperleaf, right? After we optimize, we still would like to have SME input, right? So I think there was another question about quote unquote massaging, but this is not to manipulate the result. This is really to see if the result really is what we expect, and then having that SME input, because what we want is we want the quantitative and objective sort of value framework to kind of like, as we move towards the future, so we can be more nimble, we can be more vigilant, but at the same time, I don't know if we can ever remove SME input, right? So what we want always is to kind of have the best of two worlds, if that makes sense, to really have these things come together, but also, you know, maybe capture and document SME input in a systematic manner, so that in the future those input can also be done in a more consistent manner.
Thanks, Ning. This question actually is pretty similar to that. I can take this one. Do you strictly use optimization to help the capital planning, or would you massage the results after the optimization for final decision making? So there's always going to be a level of human touch to all of this, right? There are going to be challenge sessions that come out of it. So yes, the tool is going to recommend this is where you should be doing this investment for your total value and for the highest benefit cost. But this actually, what it does, it gives you the data and the justification to get into a room and talk about it among other people and bring up real questions on, look, this is what the data is telling me, this is what it's recommending, and this is why I think we should be doing it. So there is a huge, SME input and massaging and really, a human factor that goes into this as well after we go through this process in Copperleaf.
And just to add on to that, so as we implement this Copperleaf tool, I mentioned earlier, it's about people, process, and this technology, right? So around the people part, the process part, so we're also trying to look at or assess sort of governance, right? What type of governance will we need? What type of governing bodies do we need to stand up? There may be existing like investment planning, where the ranking we refer to are happening, but does that change with the introduction of this tool? And what are the rules and the guardrails, and who are the decision makers at the end of the day? So those are some of the things we're looking to implement along with the technology, so that these things can all happen in a governed manner.
One question maybe I can take around which parameters and data was most sensitive to the Copperleaf assessment. I think it's a good question, and it really depends on the type of work and model that is used to value that work. So for the proactive main replacement programs and the asset data and the models we had for that, I would say the most sensitive parameters are those equivalent value or consequence values that some of which the CPUC has defined for the IOUs in California. So obviously changes to what your reliability consequence is associated with a meter, and how many meters are potentially impacted by a high consequence event or incident. It's all really directly influences the level of risk that's being outputted by the model, and ultimately what the Copperleaf tool will output as a value of risk mitigation and benefits. So definitely those parameters are pretty critical, and the data output is very sensitive to that. And then leads to another related question: are there quantified values that have not been defined by the CPUC that we had to derive ourselves? So in some cases, there was some of that, and in some of the latest SMAP proceeding, there is some flexibility to define and look at alternative valuations or quantified values. So we're in the early stages of that. I would say we haven't really deviated very much at all from what the CPUC has defined. So, but as we kind of have more investments in the system, we're looking at more long-term plan. there may be some calibration we would like to look at internally. I think, and that goes back to having a governing body with the right inputs from the different BUs and functions to ensure that the outputs of the program is aligned from top to bottom. So hopefully that answers those questions. The question on the multi-year roadmap. Yeah, I'm not sure if you want Maya or Ning, if you guys want to take that one.
Yeah, I think Ning, maybe this one would be you. Do you have a multi-year roadmap showing where you started and the path forward over time? Multi-year vision and transformation plan, maybe around which asset types are we bringing in and how that process is going. I think that probably is a good question.
Yeah, so we have like a high level roadmap for the asset types that we wanted to bring in, based on data availability and priority. However, I think we're also working on another part of this. I would interpret transformation roadmap, like where do we want to take in terms of asset management maturity, right? You leveraging the tool, doing organizational change management. So that's being developed, but we have sort of like an implementation sort of roadmap for what asset we might need, what type of quantitative data are we after. But we're in the, like I said, that second part where we also want to kind of transform the organization is still in development. And just to highlight on the first one that we do have, so what we've done is we did the main sort of the medium pressure pipeline that we have that David was talking about, and then from there we also did high pressure pipelines, and then we also did the reg stations, the medium to medium and medium high, and then also we are planning to start looking at compressor stations, storage, above ground facilities, and also we're going to also type in, when we start to say enterprise, we're also looking at other assets. So we're going to go into fleet facilities in the building sense, not gas facilities, and then also we're going to do IT.
These are really great questions. Yeah, these are amazing questions. Yeah. I think there's one last question that maybe we can kind of wrap it up. It says, how long did it take to start the project, or how long is the project going to take? Kind of summarizing the question. I can answer that. So we started in 2021, and this is a phased, iterative approach. We take asset by asset, and we bring that into the tool for multi-year capital planning and risk-based decision making. And where we have really good asset data, we automate a lot of that. Where we don't, we use data that we have. We use a questionnaire-based approach. We use SME input. So we kind of take it an iterative process. So every year we try to tackle a group of assets. And the way we really prioritize that is where are we investing the most in our infrastructure? So are we investing in medium pressure pipelines, high pressure pipelines, reg stations? So we kind of start there. We have good data there as well. So we kind of take it step by step. So we started in 2021, and this is going to span across kind of 4 to 5 years. So we're looking at about 2025 to 2026 to start kind of wrapping it out.
Awesome. Well, I think that with the time we have left, probably all the questions we can get through. So just wanted to thank Maya and Ning for taking the time to speak with us today and sharing your asset investment and enterprise asset management journey. So thank you all for attending as well. And PJ, I'll pass it back to you to close things up.
Thanks, David. Thanks, panel. This was a fantastic conversation, and thank you, audience, for your engagement. We love having you on and having your comments. We hope you've enjoyed today's discussion, and as you log off, please take a moment to complete our survey, give us your feedback so we can continue to provide you with quality content. Thank you for attending. This concludes today's presentation.